right, so our next topic in Unit 3 on about photosynthesis is just how this all fits together. So we want to think about how it fits together, and then we'll get into the detail of photosynthesis. So first, in this slide, that's really important that a lot of students ignore is that the sun provides energy for almost all organisms. Most of my students always want to argue that animals don't need the sun, but we do because the bottom of our food chain are plants that need the sun. So without the sun, animals would not live. Now, notice almost all, so we will acknowledge that there are organisms that live at the bottom of the ocean in the complete dark. That means they don't do photosynthesis. They do something called chemosynthesis. But we're not worried about that in this unit. We're just going to focus in on those that live out in the sun at the surface of the earth. And photosynthesis is what we rely on. Okay, so a couple of vocabulary words here. Number one, autotroph. Auto means self, troph means feeding. So an autotroph is self-feeding. A lot of people think like plants don't need to eat, but they do. They actually do need food to make ATP, but they just make their own. That's the idea. So autotrophs are organisms that use energy from the sun or from chemical bonds, which is down in the bottom of the ocean, to make organic compounds, to make sugar, to make cellulose, to make starch. Okay? So autotrophs, self-feeders, they make their own food that they need to make ATP. So examples of autotrophs are plants, that's obvious. We pretty much know that. But algae, right, the kelp that is out there in the ocean is doing photosynthesis. And then some bacteria do photosynthesis. So these are all autotrophs. Now, the other one is called heterotroph. And heterotroph means different feeding. Just means that you and I and other organisms, they have to get our energy from food, which means we have to go find food from something else and get that food, right? So examples of this are animals. So all those animal cells, they are heterotrophs. All animals are heterotrophs. Fungi, mushrooms, you might think mushrooms don't eat. Well, they actually do. They eat whatever they're growing on. So if they're growing on wood, they're eating the wood. If they're growing on leaves, they're eating the leaves. So fungi are not making their own food. They are eating the food they grow on. And then protists, so the amoeba here is about to eat whatever this is right here. So you have to eat something to make energy. Heterotroph. So here's our overview, and just notice how it is kind of a circle of life. It's a circle of atoms. Basically, the Earth, when it formed 4.5 billion years ago, all the atoms that were going to be on Earth are here. And ever since then, those atoms just get cycled around and reused and recycled over and over again. And that includes this particular cycle where we have photosynthesis, and the product of photosynthesis is glucose, sugar, and oxygen. Well, the reactant to do cellular respiration is glucose and oxygen. Glucose and oxygen come together to make ATP, energy for us. And they're split apart. The glucose is split back apart into carbon dioxide and water, which is the product of cellular respiration. And then those products are the reactants of photosynthesis. And so it kind of can go round and around. So inside a plant cell, that plant is making glucose and oxygen and then using that glucose and oxygen in its mitochondria to make ATP, which then creates water and carbon dioxide, which the chloroplast can then use again to make more glucose and more oxygen. So it just can go around and around in a plant. You and I have to go eat this. We have to go eat glucose and we have to go breathe in oxygen. But All of us, every cell on planet Earth is doing cellular respiration to make ATP because that's what we need to have energy to move, to do stuff. So the sunlight energy comes in for everything to be able to create energy out, ATP. So here is your cellular respiration equation. That's what we call it. And it's balanced. That's why we have these numbers in the front, because you cannot make atoms. Atoms exist. We just have to rearrange them. That's what chemistry is for. So we have C6H12O6, that's glucose, plus 6 oxygen molecules. It takes some enzymes, shocker, right? Enzymes are going to speed up reactions. And the outcome is 6 carbon dioxide molecules, 6 water molecules, and 1 ATP molecule. Photosynthesis is the opposite. We take 6 carbon dioxides. We actually take 12 waters. You go, why? Oh, well, they have extra water in the end. It takes a little more water to do this process. So the light, and you have enzymes, and you have chlorophyll. That's all necessary to do this. That is able to then make glucose, C6H12O6, plus 6 oxygen molecules, and notice 6 water molecules. So it's like water has to be there. It's not necessarily being used, but it needs to be there. The main point of this, though, is that the reactants of cellular respiration are the products of photosynthesis. The reactants of photosynthesis are the products of cellular respiration. All right, so here's our overview of photosynthesis that we're going to get to in a lot of detail soon, where we have light that's going to do what's called light reactions. Water is split into oxygen and hydrogen. They use ATP and ADPH. Hydrogens and electrons are going to move on to something called the Calvin cycle. Carbon dioxide is going to get pulled into the Calvin cycle, and then we're going to make glucose. Now, once we make glucose, the cell is either going to use the glucose to make ATP, or it's going to change the glucose into cellulose to make cell walls, or it's going to change the glucose and make starch and store it away for future when it's maybe not as sunny. So just to show you the two equations, we could take out this 6 waters here, and the simplified equation is 6 carbon dioxide, 6 waters make glucose plus 6 oxygens. But technically, the full equation is that there are 12 waters needed, and those 6 waters are kind of left to the side. All right, so just get used to seeing these equations and these numbers. And then just think about that basic photosynthesis, that basic plant. That plant is living out in the sun, absorbing the sunlight. Carbon dioxide actually enters through leaves through something called stomata. And so it comes in this way. Water, on the other hand, has to come in through the roots of the plant and then up into the leaves. And then a lot of oxygen that is made is not used by the plant cells because it doesn't necessarily need that much oxygen. So it makes more oxygen than it needs. So it gives out the rest of that oxygen, which just comes right off the leaves and goes into the air. And that is photosynthesis. And so that's what these bubbles are, little oxygen bubbles coming off an aquatic plant. It's underwater. And so you can just see that it's doing photosynthesis and it's making oxygen, which is pretty cool. It's a cool picture. All right, and that ends our overview.